Hello, good evening, everyone. This session is for the IIMUN USA United Nations Security Council Committee session. To mark your presence, please reply with an yes with your name and along with the institute that you're from. I repeat, to mark your presence, just reply with your name along with the institute that you're from. Okay, let's just begin. So, this session is about the council called United Nations Security Council, and we will be covering a little bit about the structure and the membership of United Nations Security Council. Besides that, we will also be covering the agenda, which is addressing the situation in the Lake Chad region. So, I will try to dissect what the agenda actually means. Besides that, I will also be covering the structure and the functioning of the United Nations Security Council. So, let's just move and begin. So, what is United Nations Security Council? So, as we all know, United Nations has six main organs. Namely, we have UNSC, then we have General Assembly. Besides that, we have Economic and Social Council. Then we have Trusteeship Council. Then we have International Court of Justice. After that, we have the Secretariat. So out of all of this, the Security Council deals with the international peace and security affairs. I repeat, the prime function of United Nations Security Council is to deal with international peace and security affairs. Now, let's say there's some crisis going on. For example, we have the Syrian civil war which is going on at present. So, in the entire United Nations, the first and the prime duty to look after the welfare of the citizens of that region, that is the Syria, the role and responsibility will be that of United Nations Security Council. And about the members, there are in total 15 members in the UNSC, and the bifurcation of this 15 member goes something like this. We have 10 non-permanent members and 5 permanent members. Now, what's the difference between both of them? The permanent members, that is the 5 countries, which are, we have United States of America, we have United Kingdom, then we have China, we have France, and then we have Russia. I repeat, we have Russia, we have China, we have France, we have United Kingdom, and then we have United States of America. These are the countries who are together called the P5 nations or the permanent members. These countries have something special given to them, and this something special is called a veto power. And this special power, which we will come on to a little later, it's very important. And the veto power is what distinguishes the permanent and the non-permanent member. Besides the fact that permanent members are always a part of Security Council, whereas the 10 non-permanent members keep on shuffling. Also, the veto power basically means that these 5 countries have the right to say a no, and when they say a no, the resolution cannot be taken forward. I repeat, if any one of these 5 countries say a no to a resolution, that means it's a negative vote and the resolution cannot be taken forward. So all these 5 countries have to say yes, only then the resolution can be taken forward. Now, remember, veto powers are only given to the P5 nations. Nobody else has that. What's another thing that distinguishes United Nations Security Council from the other organs and the agencies and the programs of the United Nations? So the United Nations Security Council makes resolutions which are not just recommendatory. Every country has to compulsorily follow if a resolution is passed in the Security Council. For example, if there's a resolution which is made or drafted in, let's say, WHO or HRC, then that resolution is just a recommendation for all the member countries which they can implement if they want to. However, in case you are in case you are making a resolution in Security Council, then you have to compulsorily follow that resolution. You don't have any other option. So I'll briefly summarize what I just said. Security Council has 15 members, 5 permanent, 10 non-permanent. The 5 permanent members are USA, UK, Russia, China and France. These 5 permanent members have special powers which is called veto power. Now this veto power is something by which if any one of these 5 countries don't agree to, that's a negative vote and the resolution cannot be taken forward. They have to agree to the resolution for it to be passed inside the council. Okay. Now another thing that I covered was that United Nations Security Council is the only organ or the body in the entire United Nations which does not give a recommendatory resolution. It gives a compulsory resolution which all the member nations have to compulsorily follow. So I hope you are clear with a little bit about what is United Nations Security Council, what is its membership, and what is the structure. Now let's just move ahead and talk a little bit about the agenda. So the agenda that we have is called Addressing the Situation in the Lake Chad region. So does anyone know where Lake Chad is located? If you do know where Lake Chad is located, please reply with a comment stating where do you think it's located. Okay, we've got a couple of answers. We've got Delhi, we've got Africa. So yes, Lake Chad is located in Africa in a region called Sahel region. I repeat, Lake Chad is located in a region called Sahel, Sahel. Now, before I come on to what the region comprises of, does anyone know why are we discussing this agenda and why do you think it's important for us to discuss this? If you do know, then please reply with the reason stating as to why do you think this agenda is important to be discussed on a multilateral forum. I'll repeat the agenda once again. The agenda is addressing this situation in the Lake Chad region. Yes, that's correct, Aryan. The agenda is related to Boko Haram. Besides Boko Haram, there are a couple of other important things which have happened and are of concern in the region, which we will briefly cover today in this session. However, does anybody here know what is Boko Haram? So, now before we learn about what is Boko Haram and what is its significance, let's just try to understand what are the regions and where is this entire situation located. So, this region, that is the Lake Chad region or the Lake Chad basin, composes of 4 different countries, namely Nigeria, then we have Niger, followed by Cameroon, followed by Chad. I repeat, there are 4 countries that comprises of the Lake Chad basin. Now, Lake Chad basin comprises of these 4 countries called Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. So, what is the main reason why we are discussing such an agenda? So, in this region, first, there are a lot of concerns that are going on. One of which, as somebody mentioned, was that we have the presence of Boko Haram. Besides that, we have the issue of food shortages. Also, we have another issue which is about a lot of people being displaced in the region. Another issue that we have is poverty. Similarly, the region has been suffering from lot of such different factors and the reasons and the people's welfare has been affected. So, to quickly tell you what are the reasons, we can briefly classify them into multiple factors which have caused the crisis at hand. So, first factor which has affected the crisis is poverty. Now, this region has been relatively very poor and marginalized. Why? Because there has not been much of investment by the government for the education or for the people to find a place wherein they can develop their skills. Besides there has been underinvestment by the government in the infrastructure, and let's say for example we have the underinvestment even in the healthcare, wherein there are no adequate healthcare facilities provided for the people. Also, people do not have enough money or even enough food to survive or to sustain. So, moving on from poverty, let's move on to the other factor, which is called food insecurity. There are over 7 million people at present who are suffering from food insecurity. Especially in Nigeria, there's acute food shortage. Now, when I say acute food shortage, this is the food shortage which has gone to emergency levels, wherein the people are starving. There's high levels of malnutrition among the children, and also the issue has crossed the level wherein the international cooperation is required more and more. Next factor that affected the crisis in the region is the climate change. Now, the Lake Chad in the question about 5 decades ago was almost 25,000 square kilometers huge. At present, Lake Chad is less than 90% of what it was before. So, out of 25,000 kilometers area, the Lake Chad now covers only about 1500 to 2000 square kilometer area. which is a significant decrease. And why is this so important? Because the people in the region are heavily dependent on subsistence agriculture. So they depend on what happens and the water resources. And due to the uncertainty in the rain, the water resources in the lake could not be harvested or be replenished. And hence, it's another issue that the climate change is affecting and leading to the first two clauses that we studied, that is the poverty in the region. People do not have the means for the livelihood. They cannot sustain. The other most important factor that caused the crisis in the region was the economic destruction. So the region has been underdeveloped in terms of, let's say, infrastructure, wherein the people are heavily dependent on livestock and agriculture, and this conflict has already deepened, wherein it has displaced hundreds and hundreds of people, and the government, in order to stop the funding of the organizations, have curtailed the economic activities in the region. Besides that, the region has a lot of high levels of corruption and mismanagement with a very weak governance, and hence these are some of the factors that have caused the crisis to get to such an exacerbated level. Now, to move on to talk a little bit about the crisis, there's this group called Boko Haram, as somebody rightly mentioned. So this group has been actively involved in trying to propagate their means. They started off in 2002, wherein their primary goal was to stop the Western influence, in particular to stop the influence of Western education in the region. Now, in order to do that, this organization or this group was created by this Muslim cleric called Muhammad Yusuf. Also, it's been alleged that Osama bin Laden was the one who had sent funds, or the seed money as you can call it, to Muhammad Yusuf in order to start this group called Boko Haram. Now, this happened in the year 2002. However, the goal of the Boko Haram expanded, wherein they wanted the government also to be the one based on the religion that they were following. They wanted it to be a predominantly Muslim majority country. Now, 2002 was not the only reason or the time wherein this started. Before that also, we had lot of updates which happened. For example, we had someone called Muhammad Marwa, or this person was the one who had led a lot of uprisings in past, especially in 1970s and 1980s, wherein the uprisings had itself caused death of over 4,000 people, including the Muhammad Marwa himself. And this uprising was predominantly to rise up against the state, that is the Nigerian state, and speak against the Western culture and the education. This is what happened in 1970s and 1980s, and inspired by this, people propagated the same in 2002, wherein they came together with similar ideologies and made this group called Boko Haram. Now, Boko Haram has been continuously active in the region, wherein they've utilized women, they've also utilized children in order to use violence as a means for propagating their ideologies. Now, we will briefly cover over the years how have they and what all have they done in order to propagate. So after 2003, in 2002 the organization was formed, or the group was formed. In 2003, Boko Haram led its first attack, wherein a lot of police stations were attacked in a state or a region called Yobe. Now, where is Yobe located? Now, Yobe is located in northeastern part of Nigeria. So, Boko Haram initially started and stemmed from Nigeria only, and Yobe was the first part wherein they attacked multiple police stations, and then they decided they needed more people in order to propagate their cause. So for the same, they started recruiting more and more children. Now, there's this one particular category of children called Alamjiri children, who are basically the ones who go away from their home in a boarding school and are supposed to ideally learn and sustain from the knowledge only. They are not supposed to take any particular resource as such. So that's the Alamjiri children. Also, next couple of years after 2003 were relatively peaceful, wherein there were not many attacks, and this time from 2003 to 2009 was spent on introducing the reforms in the working of Boko Haram. So Boko Haram wanted to streamline how it's functioning and how it will function in the future. So this couple of years were spent in this. However, in 2009, regions such as Bauchi or Borno, Kano and Yobe faced a lot of uprising. To make it simple for you, these are just regions in Nigeria. Remember, in Nigeria, they began with the uprising by killing a couple of police officers. This is something that happened in the first part of 2009. Now, to counter this insurgency, a joint military task force was created wherein they tried to tackle and get all these terrorists or the militants out of the region, wherein in the operation they killed over 700 Boko Haram militants. Also, during this year or this time, their leader, that is Muhammad Yusuf, was captured, and during his capture it was stated that he was trying to escape, and hence to stop him he was shot, and during this the leader of Boko Haram was killed. Now, police tried to justify the same, stating multiple reasons, but however, the same was taken by the Boko Haram as an extrajudicial execution. The Boko Haram members were extremely frustrated. However, they were directionless. They did not have anyone to actually support and to guide them in how to move about. So, next year, they were left in a state of uncertainty. They yet did not know how to go about because the leader was dead of Boko Haram. Then they came up with two solutions, and there were two different factors that affected their decision. The people, those who had survived the attack by the task force, decided to go to Maghreb and train with this another organization, terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. I'm sure that all of you must have heard of Al-Qaeda. So they decided to go there with Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb, and they decided to go and learn about guerrilla warfare. And besides guerrilla warfare, they also learned about something called improvised explosive device. Now, after having so much of training, they would be well versed in how to go about the combat or how to go about the uprisings. The next factor that affected was the deputy to the leader who died, Abu Bakr Shakar, was the one who was also presumed dead in 2009. However, in 2010, it comes out that the deputy is alive and he took the charge of Boko Haram, wherein he became the leader and started leading the group forward. So, similarly in 2009, Boko Haram started its militant uprising because of the proper guidance again, wherein they attacked a couple of prisons, they killed a few people and released about more than 700 inmates from the prison. So, this is something that happened till 2011. Now, to quickly tell you, similarly, Boko Haram tried proving their dominance in multiple ways by attacking churches, by attacking schools, by attacking healthcare facilities, by attacking the refugee camps in the next years. It was not until April 2014 wherein it became extremely serious, and all the people were shocked by this one incident. And this incident was in Boko Haram went to this one school in a region called Chibok, in this area called Chibok, and kidnapped about 280 teenage girls. So, when Boko Haram did that, or the Boko Haram militants did that, this got a lot of international coverage. And because of this, a lot of people were shaken, and an action was demanded from the government's end. So, since the action was demanded from the government's end, there were a couple of things that the government could do. However, do note, the government in itself was followed by a very weak governance. There was very high levels of corruption. Besides that, there was little that the government could do because the country was facing with more issues. For example, the country was facing acute famine. Besides that, country was facing an economical crisis, and also there was a climate change which were affecting the other things in the region. So up till now we've covered as to how come Boko Haram has affected or influenced a lot of decisions in Nigeria. However, Boko Haram tried to expand in 2011 and 14 multiple times, wherein it attacked, especially in 2015. It expanded its operations in Niger, Cameroon and Chad. So during this, Boko Haram led various operations. They captured multiple villages, they captured women, and the women who were captured, they were ideally utilized as suicide bombers in order to intimidate or to make sure that something of their motive is met. However, later here, Boko Haram pledged its allegiance to this one organization called ISIS, and this happened in year 2015, wherein Boko Haram said that they are in allegiance with ISIS. Again, a lot of disruptions were caused, and the main reason why such a thing happened was because, first, the economy was extremely weak. Second, the entire Sahel region, the region including these countries and a couple of other countries such as Mali, etc., they were facing all of these problems, wherein they had no other solutions. They needed funds, and for the funds, the international community had to donate the same. And also, for example, in 2011, we had the Libyan intervention by the NATO. So, there were a lot of factors that affected the region and how everything was propagated. So, I'm sure that you're understanding up till now as to how Boko Haram has risen to power and why this crisis is of that much of importance. So, let's just move a little ahead to understand the crisis a little better. Why is it so important to discuss this? So, there are multiple factors and reasons, as I mentioned, which led to the cultivation of the crisis. Now, remember, this crisis is of a very multidimensional nature, and it affected many people in the region. By multidimensional, I just mean that there were a lot of factors that had to be considered in order to deal with the crisis. So, couple of these factors that I'll just tell you, I'll repeat again, is first, the region was facing a population boom, wherein there was a rapid population growth in past decades. Along with this, there was a lot of insecurity because of organizations or the groups such as Boko Haram who would attack at any given time or would do anything because of the weak governance. Now remember, Boko Haram could only rise to power because of the loopholes or the weak governance by the government of the region. There was a lot of conflict and the violence going on, as I said before, and also there was a lot of vulnerability in the region, wherein no one was sure of the functioning of the government, nobody knew how everything would happen, and besides that, the most important thing that was there were a lot of food shortages, and the emergency levels were at the IPC phase 5, which is the last phase. It's one indicator by this one organization called FEWS. I repeat, there's this organization called FEWS which has criteria or the indicators to define the region and how badly the region is affected when it comes to food shortages. So according to this organization, that is FEWS, the food shortages in the Lake Chad Basin was at IPC phase 5, which is the last and the emergency level. To top all of this off, the region did not have proper healthcare facilities, and many people were fleeing their homes in order to get away from such a crisis. And the displacement, the people did not only flee there were not only internally displaced people, however, there were a couple of people, those who went outside the country and became refugees. They tried to sneak out of the country as well, because it was a very huge issue wherein there was a lot of political instability, and besides this we had the environmental degradation going on. So all of these factors led to the propagation of the crisis, and this in turn led to an increase in the gender inequality. So by the time people or the government could realize how big the Boko Haram had grown, how strong the Boko Haram had become, it was already too late, wherein the situation had become too fragile, with many people living in poverty, famine-like conditions, and there was continuous violence and unaccounted detainment by the task forces in order to find the terrorists or the militants. So these are a couple of things which happened and propagated the crisis to the levels which was not bearable. Now, out of all of this, one factor that had a lot of importance into play was something called the lack of governance or the rule of law. Now, the state was very weak, as I said before. There was extreme levels of corruption, and also just to state a couple of facts about the crisis at hand. In this humanitarian emergency, there are a lot of people, those who were affected, and that number comes to something close to 17 million people, and this is almost half the number of people who live in the region. I repeat the regions which are incorporated in this. First, we have the northeastern Nigeria. Second, we have the southeast Niger. Third, we have the western Chad. And fourth, we have North Cameroon. So, in these 4 different regions around the Lake Chad or the Lake Chad Basin had a population, and out of that population, almost half of it, that is close to 17 million, were affected by this crisis. And there were close to 10.7 million people, those who needed direct assistance in some way or the other. And out of them, 7 million were heavily and highly food insecure. Among this, with the children having severe acute malnutrition. So, besides this, there were close to 2 million people, those who had fled, or there were close to 2.1 million people who had been displaced. So, this crisis affected the region a lot, then if you think about it, what was the reason why we did not have any intervention from or any help received from the neighboring countries or the international community? Now, to understand this better, let's just discuss it one by one. First, why did we not have any help from the neighboring countries when such a thing was happening? One of the neighboring countries that we had is Libya. Now, Libya itself was in a state of crisis wherein the Libyan government also was facing uprising from the public, wherein, just to put it shortly, in order to prevent the Rwanda-like genocide, the Security Council had passed a resolution number 1973 as an implementation of responsibility to protect, to remove the state of lawlessness in the region. But this Libyan crisis went haywire and the resolution was implemented wherein the international community intervened and they got what they wanted. That is, they wanted the stability or the government to be overthrown. Muammar Gaddafi was the one who was the head of state at that time. He was killed in this intervention by the US. However, post intervention, the state was left in a lawlessness state. And in this, there was no proper order of going about how everyone should, or the government who will be backing up the democratic government that the people wanted, who will be backing that government up. So Libya was itself in a crisis. Another thing that we had is something called Mali, or a country called Mali. Mali was itself facing another crisis when all the causes or the factors which were affecting this region were affecting Mali as well, wherein there was a very high level political instability in the region and the entire Sahel region. Now, Sahel region in itself, it's a region in Africa which composes of a lot of countries, including the Lake Chad region. So this region in itself was facing a lot of complex and interconnected challenges. So dealing with them was another huge task that they had to consider. Now, I hope you've understood a little bit about the crisis at hand. To briefly tell you what the crisis was, the crisis at hand was about this one group called Boko Haram, whose main motive was to counter the Western influence, had come to power, and in order to tackle it, this group had done a lot of such activities which had affected a lot of people. And to put it into perspective, this number of people were close to 17 million, and 17 million was almost half the number of people living in the region, the Lake Chad region. So this issue is very complex in nature, wherein in order to discuss the same, delegates, you will have to consider a lot of factors. You will have to consider what are the roles of multiple task forces or multiple parties who are trying to deal with the issue of Boko Haram. Besides that, you will also have to consider factors such as what are the other things that the region requires or needs. Region has a lot of food insecurity. Besides that, there is a huge climate change which has been propagated. Besides that, there is a huge requirement for a strong governance to be present. So you will have to take all of these factors one at a time, delegates, and you will have to discuss them in detail. So besides this, just to tell you a few examples wherein the international community tried to intervene. In 2014, after the Chibok incident, wherein close to 250 plus girls were kidnapped from a school in Chibok, a region in Nigeria, or an area in Nigeria, the international community was shocked. So, for the same, the USA had sent a task force in order to find these missing girls who were kidnapped. Remember, till date, not all of those girls have been successfully come back or have been found. So it's yet a huge issue which is yet going on till date, wherein the latest update that we've had is wherein out of the 250 plus, we've had close to 100 of them being returned. And out of those 100, there are about 82 girls who were recently released post negotiations between the Boko Haram and the Nigerian government. Remember, the government in itself is in need for a lot of things which the government does not have. In order to have or to find a proper ground with Boko Haram, you will require a lot of things. So delegates, it's your responsibility as an international community to make sure that you are contributing. There are a couple of ways that the international community can contribute. I will just suggest a few. For example, there is a huge require for assistance in the region, so the international community can provide aid to the country. Besides that, there are multiple organizations which is providing food and the resources for the displaced people or the refugees of the region. Also, there should be a proper guidelines there for internally displaced people, because the number for internally displaced people or IDP is very high, which also needs to be considered in such a topic. So also, now we've covered a lot of factors that come into the picture when we are discussing this. Let's move on a little further, wherein we'll try to understand how come wherein the international community was taking actions in the Libya, why could the international community not take actions in a crisis which was affecting millions and millions? So the answer for this can be of multiple things. However, there are few critics of Libyan intervention who state that the international community would only intervene or would implement anything called R2P if it's something for them. For example, we had a political crisis going on Cote d'Ivoire. Besides that, we had a lot of protests in Yemen. Also, we had this situation in Lake Chad. Out of all of these issues, the international community actively decided to intervene in Libya in 2011. So, you have to consider why everything was done and then decide what are the main factors which have affected. What are the reasons everything was done? I've tried covering a couple of factors in this session, but you will have to research in depth as to what were the reasons these factors were propagated. Remember, this region has been facing environmental concerns since a lot of years now, because the Lake Chad, which was a primary source of water for many of the farmers, as the main livelihood in the region being subsistence agriculture, the decrease in water resources or the water scarcity has also affected the region very heavily. So you will have to discuss the same as well in order wherein you are countering Boko Haram. You also have ways wherein you are searching for the welfare of the people. The healthcare has been taken into consideration. The food scarcity has been dealt with. So this is one issue wherein it's not very narrow. It's a very complicated and complex agenda that the delegates you will have to cover. So I hope you are clear with the crisis at hand and what the Lake Chad region entails. Remember, the agenda is not talking about Lake Chad as the only concern. Lake Chad can be incorporated as one of the moderated caucuses. However, you have to consider the wider aspect of the surrounding regions wherein the countries are also affected. I hope all of you are clear, and if you have any questions, you can put them down in the comments below. So I'll just wait for you to comment down your questions below. Okay, so there are a couple of questions. When will the countries be allotted? The countries will be allotted soon. Along with the study material, all the delegates will be sent to all the delegates will be given their allotments as well as everything else. This is only for IIMUN USA conference. All the delegates can participating in this conference can attend the same. Seeing there are no questions, we will come to an end of this session. You can take my email address down, and in case you have any queries, you can send it across to me. We'll also be making groups wherein all the delegates can join, and the lobbying sessions and a little more in-depth discussion of the agenda can happen. So the email address is rishi.iimun@gmail.com. I repeat, it's rishi.iimun@gmail.com. You can post your queries and questions over there, and the groups will be made wherein we can discuss the agenda in detail more, and we can discuss every factor which has been affecting in detail. So thank you so much, delegates, for attending this session. With this we come to an end of this session.